Announce the panel.
Yeah, this is our second panel now with Greg, Gann, David, and Tomas. The panel will be moderated by Anita, who works with Giulio Soperti-Furga at the SEM. She is administrative director. And yeah, I think we shouldn't lose more time. I'm handing over to you, Anita.
Thank you, Yasmin. So welcome to the panelists. I don't think that we have to introduce you again because you all gave very interesting talks in the afternoon. So I would go directly into our discussion to look at why universities and academic institutes should actually invest in mission of entrepreneurship. And Austria is still at the beginning of this endeavor, and I'm sure we can learn a lot from you. So my idea is that I ask you one question to two panel members and then move on to the next question so that we can tackle a lot of different topics and tasks. So may I start with Professor Gann and Professor Galvin and ask, why is innovation and entrepreneurship important for universities? So a key question at the very beginning.
Will I go first on this then?
David, please.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, but look, I already said in my talk a couple of reasons, but there's a very good reason to do this from a pedagogical point of view. And if no one's mentioned yet today, I don't think anyway, what the people who come and study at our universities want. And actually, we should start listening to our own users and students these days. Come to learn, of course, a discipline, a subject, but they also want to gain experience for life. And since the financial crisis, I've been teaching entrepreneurship for years and innovation and entrepreneurship courses. Since the financial crisis, students don't just want to study for a vocation to make money. They also are interested in social purpose. And they want to put ideas into practice in a useful way. Entrepreneurship is a very, very good way of them getting experiential learning while they're studying their main courses. And I think it's a good pedagogical reason for universities to do this, because even if a graduate isn't going to set up their own company, the skills they'll learn will be good life skills. And I'm sure my colleagues at MIT and Cornell and ETH will agree with this. And in fact, students of mine who've then gone on to work in large companies who've studied entrepreneurship have often flourished because they've been good problem solvers, they've been good at creating options, they've been good at developing new pathways out of difficulties in their companies. So I would advocate, and this applies to social science and humanities just as much as it does to the sciences these days, particularly when you look at the amount of data flying around about social behavior in social networks these days. And the other reason are the reasons that we've heard. You know, you can create economic value, but as at least two of our speakers, Ken being probably the most articulate on this, have said, you cannot expect as a university to make money back from the IP. Very few universities make money directly. You make money from the few people who do rise to being great entrepreneurs, giving back later on in life. And that is the case where I am now in Oxford, of course, where some wonderful entrepreneurs are amongst our best philanthropists. So look, there are many reasons for doing this, but I think the basic ones are to give people life options and to create options for the university.
So Professor Galvin, want to add something to this part?
I totally agree with everything David said. I would add, I think a often missed benefit out of it is the engagement with alumni. I mean, the entrepreneurial activity forms a great way to bring alumni back, to bring them in as mentors, to bring them in as investors, to bring them into conferences and celebrations. And, you know, alumni engagement is, you know, healthy for the institution, brings speakers in for classes and students, but at the bottom line is how they drive philanthropy for the organization.
Thank you. So we have learned from the discussion chats that there is still a lot of risk aversion and skepticism around in Vienna and in Austria. How can this risk aversion be turned into something positive, pro-innovation, pro-entrepreneurship? May I ask you?
Yes, I wanted to also say that, and this is triggered by David's nice point, we ought to listen to the customers. Today, maybe more than ever, students talk in general terms about social entrepreneurship. They want to do good while doing well. And I would like to say that in my opinion, starting a tech company with classmates and with professors and with experienced serial entrepreneurs, building it to a level of 30 or 50 or 100 million in annual revenues, creating high value jobs, creating other spin-offs probably, because some will leave and start other companies using what they've learned in a successful spin-off, and the reputation of the spin-off as a tailwind in their careers. Creating suppliers, probably creating 2,000 high-value jobs is one of the most impactful social contributions you can make. And aspiring to create a nonprofit which might not have that same impact would be lower on my list of suggestions. So I think that the climate which each of the speakers, I'm looking at your faces on the screen, guys. And guys is not gender specific, Anita, in my world. Okay, so the creating an environment where a career path in creating a great company is celebrated is probably one of the most important contributions that we can make to guide the thinking of the next generation of men and women.
Thank you. Dr. Brenner, how do you do that at the ETH Zurich? Is there already enough spirit, or do you still have to raise this awareness and encourage people?
Thank you for that excellent question. Yeah, we are still at it. I think one important factor we have to consider is the options that people have. Switzerland is a country where a lot of wealth, a lot of great jobs, great companies. So it's very easy for graduates to just get the 9-to-5 job, to have family, to have their house. So the opportunity cost for doing a startup is very high. If you look at other areas like the US, if you look in Israel, there are not these options. So I think people take more risk if there is more pressure here. I think they have to get more creative. I must say most of our founders, 2/3 of them are international students, which are hungry, which don't just want the 9-to-5 job, but which are hungry, want to create something new. Or, I mean, if the technology is really excellent, and then if a researcher believes in what they do, then they want to take the bull by the horn and do their own startup. So I think it depends on the options, and then also on the incentives. If they feel that they can do better by doing a startup rather than going in the industry and getting a job, if they are just personalities which like to have fun and risk and do something and make an impact, I think these are all the factors which promote entrepreneurship at universities. I don't think you can do this by, how to say that, by mandate. or tell them to. I think the incentives have to be right, and they have to see a real opportunity and a real alternative to other career paths.
Thank you. Professor Gann, I think, wants to comment on that as well.
Yeah, this question about risk aversion. I mean, there's a bigger risk in doing nothing at the moment. You know, I quoted Lord Skidelsky, the more unstable the parameters the world you find yourself in, the more the insights or intuition of the entrepreneur matter. And my goodness me, you know, we are in a hell of a state out there and we need entrepreneurs. But, you know, I wonder whether it's risk aversion or conservatism or laziness, for goodness sake. And I did a review for the Singapore government maybe 10 years ago about the lack of entrepreneurship in Singapore. And, you know, Singaporeans have a lovely life, high standard of living. The kids get a good education and they know they'll get a good job in government or in the corporate sector, and they'll have a nice flat and a car. And the parents don't want them to be entrepreneurs because it's a risk. And if you have that culture of contentment, as Kenneth Galbraith talked about, then you won't do much until you have a wake-up call like COVID-19. And now we really need to understand uncertainty is everywhere. We need entrepreneurs. Universities need to wake up and start to give the education and the facilities for these things to happen. So I'm not sure if it's risk aversion. I don't know in Austria, I don't know well enough, but I'll be a little bit rude and say, ask yourself the question, are you just too contented in that lovely country of yours? And you might need to get on and do something.
I think what you say is very right. And I think it also helps this kind of examples, which you also presented in your talk, that there is actually a real outcome of the academic world and it can change the world and have a bigger impact. So this is, thank you for this statement as well. So what I also want to find out with you is, what is a fair share between an academic founder and the host institution in terms of financial setting? Equity, royalties. Dr. Brenner gave us some numbers, but maybe Professor Galvin can comment, or can Morse comment on that as well? If you have some recommendations to motivate founders, but also to give some reward back to society and to university. Is there something like a fair deal?
Certainly, and I think Dr. Brenner put the numbers he put up, I would characterize as typical. You know, universities, Cornell included, in the early days, tried to grab too much equity or too high of a licensing fee. And, you know, one thing a startup doesn't have is cash. So upfront fees are very problematic. If the university has too much equity, it scares off future investors. So, you know, as has been said multiple times by different people, you know, the university is not going to derive a significant revenue from licensing or equity positions in general. There are certainly exceptions, but in general. And so what the university should focus on is making it as easy and successful for companies to start up as it possibly can, and count on getting a philanthropic reward in the future.
And why do you think investors are scared off by university shares and equities? Because of a slow decision process, or what is the reason behind it?
Well, slow decision process is one, but you only have 100% of the equity. And you need to use the equity to attract, motivate, and retain A players to join the team. And when you're recruiting positions from CEO to EVP for customer acquisition, sales, marketing, those women and men will have other choices. They will probably have done it before. They'll have a track record. So they're not going to come for less than 5% or 8% in the case of the CEO who has a track record. So if you just realize that by the time you have your second or third round of funding, the outside investors are going to own more than half, and the employees will probably own between them 40%, and you need significant chunks of equity for building the team, then it doesn't make sense for there to be tired stock that's not working to help build the enterprise.
That's a good point. I mean, at Imperial, we did a review of rewards to inventors. I think it depends, Ken, on the level of maturity of the university and the system around you. And so my advice is you've got to start somewhere. And if the university is too hungry to grab everything, nothing's going to move and nothing will work. But we ended up with two tracks. We ended up with a track where a first-time entrepreneur inventor from the university who needed more support would not have such a big share of the initial pie because the university put in more capability to actually build the enterprise. And, you know, the deal here was that you can have 100% of nothing or X% of something because you don't know what you're doing. And we're going to have to do a lot of work on your behalf, on the legals, on the financials, bringing in the recruitment of the CEO and so on. But then we had serial entrepreneurs coming out of Imperial College and we said, right, you know what you're doing. You're not going to use all of this machinery. So we have a very small percentage retained by the university. You go off and do it again. And, you know, this was when we started to mature what we understood about what was needed. And so our reward to inventors scheme has a founder's choice. And all of that's on Imperial College's website if people are setting these things up, if they're not there already in Austria, and you can pull that down, the reports down and look at them. And we learned a lot from our friends in MIT and Stanford and elsewhere on how to do this stuff.
Can it also be an incentive to let researchers or professors continue their research work in an academic setting and start a company in parallel? Or do you think this is a true conflict and has to be very clearly stated?
I set up 5 companies in parallel and I've published a lot of papers and a lot of books. And some of my colleagues have made a hell of a lot more money than me doing the same thing. So I can prove to you that you can do things in parallel, but you've got to have the right colleagues around you and take the right time in your career to do that. And that requires a slight enlightenment on the administrative side of the university that doesn't exist everywhere.
I think that Herman hit the nail on the head when he said no conflict, no interest.
Yeah.
And just manage it by being open.
But I think really the ideal situation is where the faculty member stays a faculty member and continues to generate research and educate and assists in moving the invention out to a team that actually builds the company around it.
I think, Dr. Brenner, you have very clear rules here at the ETH, sure? You presented some of them. Or are there still opportunities where people can do both in parallel?
Yeah, so we actually allow that they do both at the beginning, but I would agree with Greg that it makes sense that the research group stays researching and continues doing the research for the benefit of the company. You just have to be very careful about the conflicts of interest. So you but at the beginning, we support that they start already a company while they are still ETH employees. This is a little bit delicate. We know that, but sometimes as a company, you are just able to move faster and better if you are a company and not just a student in the university. So, but on the long term, we limit, as I mentioned, the professors, their ownership. We don't think it's beneficial. Actually, our experience is the more the professors have and the more they talk, give advice to the startup, the less successful the startups were, at least in our case. So better have a little bit an arm's length there. And yeah.
Anita, we did a study at Imperial and it surprised me that the top 10% of professors in terms of their citations were the same top 10% in terms of grant awards for their research labs, and they were the top 10% of entrepreneurs.
Interesting.
Now, what that tells me is you got some really smart people who can do quite a lot of things, but you take a 30-year view to see that because they didn't do it all in 1 year. Mm-hmm. And I think what we're looking at is the long haul here, creating institutions that will foster superstars the gurus who want to do this, who want to stay close to their labs, but also go off and do something for a few years where they set their company. And most institutions don't have the personnel policies and the administrative policies to enable that to happen fluidly. And, you know, that's when you get into trouble. And Imperial's not perfect either, but we did help to loosen the opportunity set for these things to happen. But I think Tomas is right. You've got to be careful about conflicts. Most ideas, if they're going to be a spin out, start in the lab, which is the research lab. But at some point you take them out of the lab and look after them in the incubator. And the rules in the incubator have to be commercial. Tough love, you know, no zombie company hiding away as a bit of someone's research program in there. And when I set up my incubators at White City, we had a very strict rule that you can't do a swap of rent for equity. You know, if you're coming in our incubator, you pay rent at commercial rates because we've got a string of other companies wanting to get in there. And if you can't pay rent 1 month, you're out, you're dead. Someone else will come in and take that space. And you have to have a real commercial discipline once you take the idea out of the lab and then you make it stand on its feet, and the commercial discipline allows it to grow fast.
I would predict that those 10% of your professors who were the most cited and the most excellent as entrepreneurs, they were probably also some of the best teachers. And they were just plain ambitious, workaholic maniacs. And those are in short supply. And they should be,
you know, you've
celebrated, not
you've got them at MIT. Absolutely.
So I would have a next question for you. How would you define success for the university of implementing the mission, the third mission at the university? In numbers, in output?
I'll say something on that.
Yes.
Because there's multiple dimensions. There's the social purpose, there's the pedagogical purpose, there's the community purpose. And it depends just how far you want to look at the greater sort of value added for this over what time scale. And we've done quite a lot of work to try and understand that. One immediate thing you can see is vibrancy. You see activities happen that never happened before. And that's because entrepreneurs attract other entrepreneurs. The big success for me in setting up a new campus in a derelict piece of ground was when Novartis decided to put its headquarters there. And, you know, I was hoping for something like this because I'd studied Kendall Square in Cambridge, Mass for so many years. And I saw what happened, you know, when the big beasts came eventually and put their labs there, and just how much more halo effect and activity happened. It takes time. You have to be a bit patient, but then it will happen. And I'm sure it's happened in Zurich, and I'm sure it's happening. I know it's happening around Cornell in New York. And these are the things that you create. You can't predict and prescribe which company is going to come at what time. But the success is then you have some other anchors around the university that perpetuate and sustain the ecosystem, and that flourish because other entrepreneurs will come in and around them. And I think those are the longer term successes that you're looking for that support economic growth.
So Tomas, I hope that new building, which you are appropriately excited about, I notice there's some land just next to it. Why not have that be office space for important companies that want to both contribute to and gain from the research at the university, and put some connecting corridors so the entrepreneurs can go into labs from Novartis or.
Very good point, Ken. Actually, there is a project in Zurich, the Innovation Park, which intends to do exactly that. Attract companies, have lab space there, and have larger companies doing innovation. So the next level from the startups. In Switzerland, everything takes long, and this project has been going on for years. These are, we call them generation projects sometimes, and but we are still very hopeful that this will go through. We have such innovation parks in other areas of Switzerland, but in Zurich we have not yet succeeded because we had too many recourses. But yes, excellent idea, and absolutely.
Cornell is building a technology-focused campus in New York City, and one of the first 3 buildings they put up on this new campus was a co-location building to bring industrial collaborators in.
So entrepreneurs attract entrepreneurs in that setting.
Anita, maybe one more comment. This is the experience we made in Zurich. We have these small spin-offs, and these small spin-offs were acquired by larger players, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, name it. And then those which were not yet in Zurich then came into Zurich, and they generated a lot of workspace, a lot of new jobs there, because these big players like Facebook started suddenly hiring more and more people there. And so it's important to have startups in these cities, which then attract also the big players through this mechanism of acquisition.
So it's not only important for the universities, but the whole city and society.
Absolutely.
In that sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just one other comment on this that we learned when we were setting our campus up was to work with the local borough, the local authority. Of course, London has 33 of these, and it's a big city. But we got very close to the local one, and we have other big companies in the local borough, like the headquarters of GSK. And we decided to sponsor a new office, an enterprise office between Imperial College and the borough authority. And we recruited people who would be networkers. And their job was to network the little companies, the startups, with the big companies, and then attract inward investment, because I didn't have time and I didn't have a team to do that. And so we paid the salaries jointly of a team of people, and those people did amazing things. They hosted breakfast meetings with CEOs. They got on the TV. They did all the inward investment. I could point people to them. They could tell me which companies were starting up in which area, in which technology, and they signposted. And they were the lubrication for the ecosystem, and they made it visible. You could see an ecosystem map from these people and see who was locating where. And that made it so much easier to introduce new players to the system. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of things that connect then to the local government networking capability that help motivate an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I would like to use the last 5 minutes to ask you for some advice for new entrepreneurs, for students and postdocs, because what I was missing in this conference a little bit was questions from them, and also to see if you can help them convince them to this step. And one of my questions would be, what do you deem to be most valuable for a researcher who would like to start a company, to have a kind of a mentor, a sponsor, or to exchange with peers? Is there really a kind of a buddy system which helps? What is your experience in that? So, Professor Galvin, want to start with?
I think the answer is all of what you mentioned. I mean, some of the most interesting programs that Cornell has started in the last couple of years, the first one actually started at their new tech campus, are programs focused specifically on graduate students, Ph.D. students, and postdocs that provide them with a little bit of funding and time and mentors to see if their idea merits actually taking it further into a commercialization phase. And you know that there's very little entrepreneurial training in the typical graduate or postdoc education process. And so I think the organization has to proactively help them decide whether pursuing a commercialization project is something they really want to do and can do.
Greg, you're absolutely spot on there. I mean, the one part of the community, the engine room of research, are your doctoral and postdoctoral people. And they're the ones who are on the temporary contracts, who often are living in a garret somewhere. And find it difficult to make the right connections. And yet they're the brain power that could have ideas that will fuel entrepreneurship. And we were missing this piece at Imperial. So we set up a special program for doctoral and postdoctoral in the way you were talking about in Cornell. And we also did it in collaboration. We set up what was called the MedTech Super Connector, because there's a lot of bio and medtech in London. And we joined forces with 5 universities. And we all clubbed together to put money in for a mentoring scheme and a competition. And that really gave life to a whole flotilla of doctoral and postdoctoral researchers. And if they wanted to, they could then come to us for programs to support their entrepreneurship. And we tried to really make that happen in a proper way, where it didn't exist before at all. In fact, we didn't even know who they were, whether they wanted to do something entrepreneurial, because there was nowhere to connect to. So I think universities themselves have to take it upon themselves to make the conditions and provide some services here. And I'd like to learn more about what you've done in New York, actually, on that.
Maybe a very last question to Ken and Dr. Brenner. Is there one characteristic or skill which you would say is crucial to start a company for an academic researcher?
Passion for delivering value to customers.
To the point.
Okay, to the point. I'm maybe not so short, but we discussed the high success rate of our startups. I think one factor is that during their studies, students learn already the critical skills. They learn to be persistent. They learn to think about problems, find solutions. They learn to discuss. They learn when they have to pivot. They learn to work in teams. They have their subject matter expertise. So I think students are ideals, or academic or researchers are ideal founders. They have already all the skills. They just have to learn the additional business skills. But from their personality, they are very close.
Most researchers that I know already have learned how to pitch in order to raise money for their research. So that's a starting point.
So it's just a matter of doing it then, if we encourage now people.
Well, I guess the one thing that might be in short supply with researchers at world-class universities is humility. I don't know, but I've read that. And I think that willingness to embrace lower salespeople and business people, and see that running a company is very different from running a lab. So you're going to have to, even if you're a world-class Nobel Prize winning professor, you're going to rely upon people who are different.
Thank you for your input. I think we have to give back now to Yasmin. I would like to thank also on behalf of our scientific community in Vienna and in Austria for all your input and interesting thoughts. And I hope that you will also follow us and our endeavors in future and be available for questions and help also in the coming months and weeks.
Yes, please stay with us for a few more seconds. We have one more question for the panel from the audience. Thank you very much for this discussion, by the way. Fantastic listening to you guys. Amazing inputs that we are able to hear from you guys. Irina Fielka asked one question, which was, so to say, supported by many people in the chat. What do you do at your university to enforce more female students in these programs and also female entrepreneurship to tap into that huge potential, which is mostly untapped? Do you have any advice on that? Whoever might
focus on it. It needs to be deliberate. So, Cornell has very recently created a women entrepreneur program, a way to bring women entrepreneurs together and engage them. And then the other important part is actually having the women there in the first place. So Cornell Engineering has now achieved more women undergraduates in the College of Engineering than male, which is way beyond most other universities. So if you don't have the women there in the first place, you won't have them as entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and Greg, that's absolutely right. And Imperial done something similar. We set up a women-only entrepreneurship and innovation club 5 years ago, and we had a fantastic philanthropist, a woman entrepreneur, donate prize money, $100,000 for the top prize each year. First year, we had 70 competition entries from companies set up only by women in our student population at Imperial College, and it's grown since then. The one interesting thing from me as a white elderly male was the obvious now but outstanding thing was that the ideas that were coming through that channel were not necessarily ideas a bunch of males would have thought of doing. And it was really refreshing to have the diversity of new types of companies on new products and new services, because we had the other 50% of the human race engaging their brains in being entrepreneurship, and we opened the door to it and had a special program. And so I don't think there's any looking back from this now, and Imperial has a wonderful women's program for entrepreneurs, and it's fabulous to do it. Prize money is useful actually just as an incentive.
Prize money, and as far as I understood from both of you, this aspect of having female-only programs, so to say, to encourage women to jump into them. Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to close this panel with a quote from the chat from Raphael Friedl. Great panel. What a pleasure to listen. Thank you very much for taking your time and for being with us. All the best and goodbye.